Good evening. Welcome to Speaking in Your Basement. Back in the 90s, I had a dream. I wanted to be a kickboxer. I'd read Black Belt magazine. No YouTube at the time, so I couldn't really watch fights. But in Black Belt magazine, they kept showing this K1 event every so often when one had just happened. They'd write it up, doing articles, talk about how the tournament went, who won, talk about the specifics of the fighters. It was at the time it was one of the biggest, if not the biggest, kickboxing events in the world, and I think it eventually turned into Glory. And you can still see Glory matches if you go onto YouTube and just look them up. But back in the day, there was all these guys that were on covers of Black Belt: Peter Aerts, Ernesto Hoost, Andy Hoog. Andy Hoog became a guy later. He was, I don't know, he was something else. Bob Sapp. Mirko Cro Cop was in there, but a lot of legendary fighters. I wanted to be one of those guys, and I had no idea, just no concept of the kind of work that would take. And I'd been looking for a while for a martial arts school in Florida. I was in Northwest Florida, kind of the backwoods of Florida, and there was a little karate school in town, and there was a little taekwondo school in town. Tried both those, didn't like them. Proceeded to drive all over that area of Florida, driving up to, like, in one case, an hour and a half away. But I didn't find anything that worked. There's places far away that probably would have worked, but between gas and working minimum wage, having to drive like an hour and a half regularly, it just wasn't happening. But I thought, well, they're all in outstanding shape. I could at least get in good shape, and then when I find a good trainer, or one that I can work with, then I can focus on the technical side of it a little more. But right now, I'll just get in outstanding shape. And at the time, there were these commercials for the Total Gym. And one of the people advertising, I think it was Christy Brinkley was one, but the other was Chuck Norris. And of course, Chuck Norris had been a fighter. It was a legend in the martial arts community. So I thought, this is what Chuck Norris uses. I got to get a Total Gym. The Total Gym was somewhere in the range of $600. $600 back in the 90s. I was working minimum wage-ish. It was sometimes a little more than minimum wage, but not making a ton of money. But I can't remember if I saved up or if they had a payment plan I got on. And it took me something like 6 to 9 months, something like that, to get the money together for the Total Gym. But I did it. I got it. I got this Total Gym. And I started using it. Of course, I didn't use it as regularly as I planned to, but I used it pretty regularly. It was one of my purchases that didn't just sit there and gather dust. I actually used it. And I probably got in better shape. I didn't get in great shape, but better shape. And years later, I finally, when I moved to Colorado with the Army, I found a karate school that I liked, and I stayed there for 7 years, practicing regularly, and earned a second-degree black belt. By this point, I'd gone through a number of different jobs and had, of course, joined the Army as well, and realized I wasn't going to be a kickboxer. But all that interest in martial arts got me to take some serious action, or at least what was serious action for me at the time. For me at the time, I had virtually no dedication to anything except working enough just to keep the bills paid, and then entertaining myself largely with alcohol, but other things here and there on my spare time. And to have something like that was motivating enough to get me to set aside money to be somewhat disciplined, and then to follow through and actually use the exercise device I got for several years after that, and then eventually lead me to finding a martial arts class that I stuck with for many years. That was something pretty cool. And I've seen this pattern repeat itself, oftentimes not as major and long-term ways as this did. But either way, it's pretty interesting to get involved in something, even if your expectations are completely unrealistic to begin with, as mine were. But to stay with it long enough to get something of value for. Now, I didn't become a kickboxer, but I got in shape, and then I had something very interesting to occupy me for about 7 years. I still have an interest in martial arts. I don't practice very actively anymore. But that dedication, that willingness to stick to it, it was well worth getting into it, even if my initial vision was nothing like what I ended up coming out with. I've seen that in many places where I get the crazy big idea, the giant goal, or whatever it is, and I pursue it, and it doesn't happen. But I get some pretty cool things out. Anyway, there's lessons learned, and there's more discipline developed, and there's a lot of fun. There's a lot of fun had on the journey. Dreaming big is good for two reasons. One, if you're serious, if it's really for you and you stay after it, you can get your goal or something close. That's very useful. But another reason is when you actually pursue something, when you put some time into it, even if it's not enough time or enough dedication to get anywhere close to where you're hoping to get, the time and dedication you do put in there always has a positive return. You get something out of that. And that's valuable. And you might learn to be more practical and more realistic over time. But don't be afraid to occasionally dream big, to occasionally reach outside of what's likely and think, is this possible? Could I do this? Because if you get serious and you focus and you keep following through, you will get something out of it. And it's always possible. Again, if you're dedicated enough, if it's the kind of thing that lines up with you, you'll move all the way to your dream. I'm Ben Langley. Thank you very much for spending some time with me tonight. We'll talk again soon.